I am incredibly excited for this masterclass. I get excited for all of them, but I don't know if you guys realize, but today is the 1 year anniversary of George Floyd's murder, where our attention, once again was heightened to all the injustices we have in the world. So I think it's an appropriate topic today to talk about really important stuff, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I picked two absolute rock stars to really help us understand things even better. So, first is Erin Dangerfield. Erin is the Vice President of Human Resources for the Golden State Warriors. So, thank you so much for joining us, Erin. And we have Ginnette Harvey, who is the brand new CEO of Harper and Gray, her own company that she just started after an absolutely ridiculous career in the staffing industry. So Erin and Ginnette, welcome to the Talent Champions Council Masterclass on diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Thank you so much for having us. I'm really excited for the conversation today with you and Ginnette and hearing all the questions and comments that people have.
Awesome. Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, I have got a ton of questions. So our format for anyone who hasn't been on a masterclass before is we're going to spend the first half. I'm going to ask a bunch of questions that I have for Erin and Ginnette, and then we'll transition. We'll do an open Q&A. So what you'll do is just put in the chat that you have a question, and then Kathy will feed those to me, and we'll call on you, and you can ask your questions directly to Erin and Ginnette. Sound good? So let's start out. I don't like to make assumptions, and I think people hear diversity a lot, and now hearing more on DEI, the equity and inclusion part. So I guess help us to define what diversity, equity, and inclusion means. And then I think really, why is it so important?
Ginnette, do you want to go or you want me to take it first?
Yeah, happy to kind of start. And yeah, thanks so much for having me, and really happy to be here, Scott, and happy to be sharing the virtual stage with you, Erin, too. So diversity, equity, and inclusion. I actually saw something that really summed that up quite nicely the other day. Diversity is facts, equity is choice, inclusion is an action, and belonging is an outcome. For me, I think that it's interesting now that we see diversity and inclusion kind of used so interchangeably, and there is a really clear sort of difference between the two. So I think when we're talking about diversity, we're talking about representation. And now that representation is covering such a huge spectrum, right? So we're talking about everything from race, ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation, social class, physical ability and attributes, and kind of on and on. I was actually reading a post this morning where someone sort of said, it was acceptable for organizations, I think sort of 5 years ago, to say, we're just going to look at this through the lens of gender and we'll get to all the other stuff later. That is not acceptable now. Like, there are a number of different sort of elements that should be and are being sort of addressed. So I think it's important, first of all, to clarify that when we're talking about diversity, we're talking about representation. Equity is about fairness, and inclusion is really about honoring those differences. So it is about creating a climate where absolutely everyone can bring their true self to work. And I think where you'll sort of kind of get this almost kind of confusion is, okay, well, we've got representation, like we've got people who kind of look different, but how comfortable do they feel to be able to bring their true selves to work, to kind of show their differences? And is really kind of comes down to, on an organizational level, do we value that uniqueness, and have we created a space in which you can, kind of express that and bring it to the table? I think a lot of organizations feel more comfortable talking about diversity because it's been the conversation for sort of longer, and it's easier to measure. Like, I mean, we're all probably quite goal-driven people, and when you can kind of have that clear line of sight, how many African-American people have we hired? How many women are in leadership? Like, it's clear, you know where you are, you can set clear goals. Whereas with inclusion, I heard this described as trying to nail Jello to the wall, which makes a ton of sense to me, right? Because it's more nuanced, it's so much more complex to sort of understand. There's so many more factors to really understand the true nature and the true level of inclusion within your organization. And the good news is, I think there's tons of companies that are doing this really well, but I think it does take more commitment and more of a willingness for organizations to actually take that conversation from diversity and move it firmly into equity and kind of inclusion.
Yep.
And I'll probably kick it over to you, Erin, for the second part of Scott's question around why it's important.
Go ahead, Scott.
I do think that's such a big part that's missing, is I think people talk about it because they feel like they need to talk about it, but you have to take action. And I think one of the things that prevents people from taking action is they don't understand the importance.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great definition. And I would say that diversity is the easy part. And it's kind of the part that people think they've checked the box and they've done what they need to do. Equity and inclusion is the really hard part in many ways, to the point of nailing Jello to the wall. And it really requires that we question the norms, values, and practices that we have in place within our organizations and in our society. And that's difficult because, number one, it's uncomfortable and nobody likes to have uncomfortable conversations. And I'm an HR person, so I know that managers hate having uncomfortable conversations about performance, let alone about something as deeply personal as equity and inclusion. It also requires us to really examine our own privilege and how we benefit from the status quo. And we all benefit from it somehow, whether it's because you've gotten opportunities or as little as, like, I have a pretty good thing going and I don't want to rock the boat, so it's easier for me to just let things go. So people want to do that. And then it's really about power. And it's very easy to say that I believe in this, and of course I believe everyone should be treated the same, but I don't want to actually give up any of my power. And there's that quote by Franklin Leonard that says, when you're used to privilege, then equity can seem like oppression. And so I think that a lot of times people aren't really willing to do the things that they need to do to take the next step, because it really requires us to examine our own practices deeply and question some of our motivations and the things that we do. But why is it important? I mean, it's the right thing to do. Oftentimes that is not enough to convince people. So if you're not convinced by that, it is good for business. And there's a lot of studies that show that diverse, equitable, and inclusive environments lead to better outcomes. They're more innovative, they're more efficient, they have better revenue, or they do better with revenue. They're also a kind of a risk it's good for organizations that are risk averse, because we can all look at some very high profile missteps that have been made in advertisement and product development. And you'd think, gosh, who let that go through? Like, was there somebody at the table that said, why are we having this ad, or why are we doing things this way? And maybe they were at the table, but they weren't included. There wasn't real belonging. It wasn't a safe place to actually voice their opinion. So it's important because it's good for business in a number of ways.
Love it. So I think mistakenly, and I'd love to hear your opinions on this. I think people think, okay, that's HR's responsibility. And, HR is just a very small piece of a large organization. Where do you think the responsibility for DEI belongs, and especially for those that don't have that function? What are your thoughts?
Well, I think that it's in the past, it's been kind of a compliance thing. Like, we have to follow the rules that the government has laid out for us. And so it fell on HR a lot, but we all know now, hopefully, that DEI is so much more than that. In the last year, since the murder of George Floyd, I think a lot of organizations were kind of thrust into this, and they had not been having conversations about it. And so oftentimes it was the HR person, who so often is a woman. So it's kind of easy to say, oh, we'll have the woman lead our DEI efforts, or some other person of color in an organization. And that is absolutely the wrong way to go about it. In some ways, it's everyone's responsibility, because if we're going to actually challenge these practices and norms and values, everyone has to be on board with it. But at the same time, when something is everyone's responsibility, it's no one's responsibility. And too often we see that projects, no matter what they're about, don't actually execute well because no one's ultimately responsible. So to me, the person most responsible is the chief executive, and they have to be willing to hold people accountable. And I read somewhere, and I can't remember where, that DEI is one of the few places where you can fail to deliver business results on an ongoing basis, and there are never consequences to it. And so we see organizations who've been trying to reach some goal for years, and no one's ever held accountable, or the person who's held accountable is some DEI person who was never empowered to actually do their job. So the chief executive has to be the person that's ultimately responsible for DEI, even though it's everyone's responsibility for carrying it out in an organization.
Agreed. Great answer. Ginnette, any thoughts?
Yeah, it's just, I mean, I wholeheartedly agree with everything that Erin said there. One of the things that I think is really perhaps making this a more important conversation than ever, in terms of, we all own and we all kind of care about this on a human level, is looking at the impact that it's having around hiring and retention. So when you start to look at the stats now, it's so important to employees to work in a company that feels like it's authentic around its diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts. And I think the last stat I saw was between 50 and 60% of people said that it was a defining reason for whether they joined an organization or whether they stayed within an organization. And so because so many of us are unwilling to kind of look the other way, and to Erin's point, work in organizations that make really bold statements but then don't kind of follow through with that, and it is actually impacting the ability to kind of attract and retain the right talent. Right. It's finally, I think, producing that level of kind of accountability where it should sit, which is in the C-suite and with kind of the senior leadership team.
Appreciate it. Great feedback. What approaches do you think organizations should take to make sure that the company is aligned with their DEI efforts?
So there needs to be, so to achieve true inclusion within an organization, there has to actually be alignment on 3 different levels. So one is organizational inclusion, the other is work group inclusion, and then line manager inclusion. So when you're talking about organizational inclusion, you're looking there for what policies are in place. Does the organization create and actively support employee resource groups? Is there a clear mission statement around diversity, equity, and inclusion? And is that, do the company's values really underpin those same kind of principles? Is there that golden thread? What training is in place? Does the organization create space and forums for these conversations to be happening? You know, are there mentoring and sponsorship programs for underrepresented groups? So there's all of these different things, and I think there's probably Erin can no doubt add a ton more things, but at an organizational level, like those are the things that you're kind of looking for. But then the work group inclusion, that's your sort of day-to-day experience, and is really the sort of norms within which the team operates. And so you can actually, sometimes you'll see the differences when people ask, how is it to work at this company? Well, it's great if you work on the engineering team, but you don't want to work on the marketing team, right? Like it's these kind of sort of differences, which are, you know, are there fair employment reviews? Are people valued for being themselves? Do you get the opportunity to contribute you input? Is there a safe way to report grievances? And so again, this is really the sort of definition of how you know, at a team or departmental level that you're really kind of operating. And then the other area is actually line manager sort of driven. I personally think this is one of the most overlooked areas. So, you know, companies will feel that, you know, we got these great team dynamics, we got all the things at an organizational level. Well, actually, my experience is going to be so shaped and so defined by my day-to-day interaction with my line manager. And here is where you see such a big difference between whether line managers authentically kind of buy into this, and number two, the actual skill set around being able to manage, you know, and kind of lead in a really inclusive way. There's tons of surveys. I mean, the Gallup survey being probably one of the most well known about people leaving managers, and I think as relates to diversity, equity, and inclusion, this is a huge one. It's still the sort of biggest culprit. When I launched Harper & Gray, it was one of the reasons that I knew that I absolutely needed to have a support in service line that developed managers through executive coaching in this area, because if you've been used to leading teams that look like you and think like you, and then all of a sudden there's all these diversity initiatives, but there isn't necessarily that kind of support, I think we really do need to kind of meet managers where they are, and it needs to be a priority for organizations, because for them to be aligned, you're looking at you know, how well they are role modeling, you know, failure and approach to sort of risk, and how well they sort of, do they value good decisions over being right? Do they help their team to kind of lean into discomfort? Are they fair, transparent? Like all of these different things that, you know, sort of go into the impressions that employees are kind of left with. So I would say it's kind of the combination of those three things. If one of them's misaligned, then I think it's very, you'll see that come out in engagement surveys and kind of feedback, and you won't hit the mark.
Yeah. And I think, so taking a step back for us, because we have such a global brand, right? This really big brand, our employees are always looking to see, how do our internal efforts align with what is happening externally? So we spent a lot of time thinking about that. And for us, it was setting up a framework, and we have 4 pillars, and I can talk about them a little bit. But I think the idea of having a framework that crosses different areas of the organization and how you approach DEI efforts is critical. So we call them our 4 pillars: feet, tongue, heart, and wallet. So feet is all about how we show up in the community, our community relations efforts, our volunteer efforts amongst employees, how we partner with our partners, like, Chase Center is named after, in showing up to have programming for different areas of the community, and also how we align with government entities and community organizations. So this year, for the first time, we supported legislation, which is not something we've done in the past, that falls under the FEET framework. And then we have tongue, which is how we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion in our social channels and marketing and in PR efforts, but not just how we talk about it. It's looking at what voices we choose to amplify, because so much is about how you use your platform to amplify others. And then we have heart, which is a lot about what Ginnette talked about. It's all the internal stuff, and that is sort of run by HR. So our reviews and our hiring and our training and development, and tracking different goals and metrics throughout the organization, all of our pulse surveys. And then last is wallet, and that shows up in 3 ways. We have our Warriors Community Foundation, which is how we donate money. And we're looking at those organizations that we're donating to and making sure they're doing the type of work that we want to see, and they represent the population that we want to support. But it's also about how we have diverse suppliers and who we're spending our money with, and building that network, and really looking at our procurement function, and also how we partner with people. So we've audited all of our partners, which is a really large source of revenue for us, and making sure that they are aligned with us on DEI efforts. So it has to be bigger than just what you're doing internally, which is absolutely critical. And that's what I work on most of the time. But it's also about making sure that what you're doing externally and in other parts of your organization are aligning with that as well. So that group that works on the 4 pillars, we meet regularly. We're reporting out to the organization to hold ourselves accountable. We've talked about it externally, so that we're also holding ourselves accountable to our fans and our community and all of those stakeholders. So I think that that's a huge part of alignment, is looking beyond just those internal practices, and also looking at how you're interacting with your community, with your clients and customers, and all of those different stakeholders.
Fantastic. I think one of the things that companies absolutely have to do if they want, a more diverse workforce, it has to start with your recruiting process. And what are some concrete things that companies can do to diversify that recruiting pipeline?
Erin, do you want to start this one?
I can start. So, we're really lucky, and many sports teams do not have an actual recruiting function. We're very lucky to have a fully built out one that can spend a lot of time on pipeline development. The NBA is also great, because they have a function that is just dedicated to helping teams improve their HR practices. And so they are a resource, and they have developed a lot of relationships with professional organizations that represent diverse or different demographic groups, with different colleges and universities, like historically Black colleges and universities. But we also do that work in developing those relationships. A lot of thought is put into how we approach our internship program, and making sure that we're going to diverse organizations, diverse universities, and looking at the number of Pell Grant recipients and the number of first-generation college students, because to the point Ginnette made at the beginning, diversity is not just about race and ethnicity. Right. It is also about all of the other ways that we show up. Thinking a lot about accessibility as we go through recruiting. And I think that's sort of the 4th thing that people are talking about more: diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility. figuring out how we make sure our recruiting process is really accessible for people so they can fully participate in it. And then making sure that your panels are diverse, because I believe, and I think the studies show people want to work in diverse workplaces. So when they see that diversity within your organization as they go through the process, they are much more likely to want to join your organization. But we also do a lot of virtual programming where we're targeting different groups of people, having people learn about our organization. So much of sports is about networking, and people don't have the opportunity to network. So we try and set up opportunities for people who wouldn't normally have exposure to actually network with people within the roles and with senior leaders within our organization. So that's a lot of what we're doing. And I know Ginnette probably has a ton of ideas too, since staffing is her background.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just kind of flag a couple of them. I think, you know, you bring up a really great point, Erin, which, you know, first of all, I think it is about candidate selection is kind of where it really starts. So asking questions to sort of you know, really make sure that even the parameters that you've put in place to hire someone, are they necessary? So, you know, take a college degree. It's just an automatic now for people to put on there, must have a bachelor's. But actually, you know, many of these jobs, you know, you don't need a degree for. And I was just speaking with a nonprofit yesterday that is really focused on promoting kind of stars into to kind of the workforce, so people skilled through alternative routes. And so, you know, there's 70 million of them in the US, and 61% of them are happen to be you know, Black and Hispanic. And so you know, just actually really being quite conscious of the sort of the criteria that we're putting in place and making sure that that's not exclusionary. The same thing with schools. The organization that I worked at for many years, you know, people were, we want to see candidates from this school, and this school, that costs an absolute fortune to kind of go to. And so we saw very, very similar demographic coming through. You then layer on a referral program where you start driving referrals, and then before you know it, you can see why every single person looks the same. So even just thinking about, maybe, you know, referral programs are amazing, but perhaps you de-weight them, you know, and that's the way to kind of create balance, that you're really careful about the schools that you're kind of going to, and making sure that they're representative. And then I would also say, you know, a lot of organizations from a recruitment standpoint, you know, they find it easier to implement the initiatives to diversify entry level and middle, you know, sort of mid-level, where I think it's really important that organizations are taking a look at board level. And so even if that means that you are adding more board seats or adding more seats to your senior leadership team, fundamentally, that's where the power dynamics are in an organization, you know, sort of, you know, whether we like it or not is kind of fact. And for people to actually really feel that they are part of a, you know, a diverse and inclusive culture, they need to look and see representation of people who look different at the top. Board level recruitment is extremely intimate, right? It's kind of like you spend a lot of time when you're on a board with people, and I would say that tends to be more who you know than anything else, right? So it's kind of, you get played in. And so if companies are not really intentional about doing that different, again, is kind of more of the same. And that's where we know that real impact and real change can kind of happen. So to Erin's point, even working with suppliers that are diverse when it comes to filling those board seats, don't just go to the same executive search team that you've always been using, where they don't have an ounce of diversity on their team. You know, you need to kind of, you know, if you want to get different, then you need to sort of operate different and kind of work with different suppliers who are diverse themselves.
Yeah, and we cannot underestimate that once you have people in the door, this is where the equity and inclusion comes into place, right? Like, you can hire all the diverse people you want. They are not going to stay or actually contribute to your organization in a meaningful way if you're not doing the other stuff in the next part of it. So I don't want to underestimate how important diversity recruiting is, but it's like it's like the tip of the iceberg, and organizations have to do so much more.
Yeah,
I think we're gonna have to have you guys back for another session. Our members are chomping at the bit to ask questions. They could be just tired of me asking questions. So we are going to go to Catherine in Vermont. You are up.
Okay, thank you so much. This has been very informative. I have a question for you, Erin, and obviously, Ginnette, you can answer too. What do you think companies, either startups or Fortune 500 companies, can learn from the MBA and the WMBA, and how they've really publicly embraced and facilitated and fostered racial justice and true inclusion?
Yeah, I mean, there's so much to learn because it's really been about identifying key stakeholders within the organizations. And for us, that's been players, but also all of the people on the business side, and really listening to what's important to them and amplifying their voices and using their platform. But I think sort of the bigger takeaway, because a lot of what stops companies from taking bold stances is fear, is that the WNBA, the NBA took some really clear stances over the last year that were controversial in many ways. And our market is one that was very supportive of the things that we did, but not every market was like that. Some NBA teams really dealt with a lot of blowback in their markets and came out the other side okay. Because when you stand for something, it's better than standing for nothing or being wishy-washy or trying to please everyone. So I think the biggest takeaway for organizations is really that you can make these stances and you can amplify this message and it will be okay for business. In fact, it will be better for business because we've really thrived. We had this amazing season that, you know, we're going into the playoffs. It's been successful. The WNBA has had higher viewership than they've had in the past. I'm such a huge W fan. And so I think that's the biggest thing, is you don't gain followers by kind of choosing to sit out these things. And for us, we've had employees who have told us, I don't agree with everything that you are doing, but I appreciate that you're consistent and you always say what you believe. And so I think that people appreciate that ultimately, even if they don't agree with you.
Thank you very much. I helped to launch the New York Liberty team at Madison Square Garden, so I was very pleased with the Atlanta Dream and all that they did to foster such a presence on the election.
They are just amazing. The women in the W are amazing, and they don't get enough credit because I think they push the NBA in many ways too.
We're going next to Wisconsin. Tanya Thorson.
Hello, thank you so much. It's been so informative, Ginnette and Erin. It's a pleasure to meet both of you. I just, I have a comment. I think you're so right in terms of a lot of companies talking the talk. And I think the walk is so imperative. And I think they're looking at this in many ways. I feel that it's just a transaction. And I think, Erin, you said it's once you get through those doors, it's really where, you really need to walk the walk. And, I think it's so valuable as today we have 4 unique generations that we are working with. And, you can't be all built from the same cloth today. We're in real time. And I think it's really important to have that diversity of thought and ideation coming through at the table. And, for me, who's looking for employment today, trying to cross into another industry, sometimes you can't even do that. And I think that's amazing if you bring diversity of different backgrounds to the table. And so I'm having a little bit of, struggle trying to cross over into that other lane in some of my situations. But I think we just need to keep talking about this, and it needs to really start resonating with not just a small circle of companies, but and it not be a transaction. It really needs to be, an experience that we all address. That's it.
Thank you, Tanya. So we are going to go to Scott in Colorado.
Hey, ladies, first and foremost, love the work you're doing. And, for someone who is actively thinking about this and in the market all the time, I'm really curious, what are the trusted sources you go to educate yourself to make sure that you are up to date and present with all the new initiatives that are coming on, and making sure that you're exercising DE&I in the most effective ways and as possible? Oh, man.
Okay, cool. Sure, I can jump in, Erin, to start if you want on that one. I think number one is just being quite present with really understanding kind of the challenges that organizations are having, and just the actual feedback that's coming from individuals within those groups themselves, because I'm really quite deeply entrenched in the staffing and consulting space. I sit on the council for the American Staffing Association, and there's a ton of programming around diversity, equity, and inclusion that comes out through that, which really kind of helps and sort of supports my learning, both as relates to the staffing industry and then to kind of the broader market. And I'm part of a number of kind of different other DE&I groups as well, which provide, again, really great perspectives and give kind of a bit of a drill down depending on the subject matter. When I worked for a big corporate, I would make sure that I sponsored some of the ERGs, so that again, I could kind of get that firsthand. I actually just completed a program with Cornell around diversity, equity, and inclusion, which was, if anyone is interested in kind of getting to really to grips with this, I mean, it was gold standard. It was brilliant.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I was talking to a member earlier today, and her daughter is going through that Cornell course
Awesome.
and absolutely loving it. So yeah, 2 recommendations for the Cornell DEI course in one day.
Yeah, I have heard such great things about that course as well, and hopefully I can have a chance to do it. I know San Francisco University also has a course that they put on recently that has been really well received. But I don't limit where I get information, because I think that there are so many great resources out there, and there are people doing great work. So I'm reading things from people on LinkedIn. I'm on Clubhouse listening to what people have to say about it. I'm reading Harvard Business Review to see what they're talking about. I mean, the great thing is that this topic is at the forefront of many conversations, so it's not hard to find information. But I think a lot of trade industry sort of things, like NBA specific stuff, sports specific stuff, there's a lot of things coming out of that. And NBA is always providing us resources and training. And then we are also just seeing a lot of talk about it in HR. So you go to SHRM, which is the Society for Human Resources Management, and they're talking about DEI all the time and have really great resources available to people. So I don't think limiting yourself to any one place or any couple of places is the right thing to do. There's so much great info.
That's perfect. Guys, thank you so much for everything.
Thanks.
We're going to go down to sunny Florida and Gary Rogers.
Thank you, Scott. It is sunny today, blue skies and lots of sun. But thank you, ladies, for sharing. I mean, I honestly, this isn't really an easy conversation, you know, like a lot of this that's going on. And I was just, to be honest with you, I'm a little nervous even asking my question. I'm not sure why that is, but it has something to do with myself. Like I, you know, grew up playing sports, and I played sports for most of my life until I was 29. And, you know, I'm just thinking about the sports teams that I played on. You know, you get out on the field and you make plays and you just do your thing. And at the end, the coach makes a decision. Are you a starter, or are you going to make the team or not, based off of, you know, how well you play? And, you know, it didn't matter if, you know, I'm white playing an outside linebacker position, or if I was black, or it didn't matter what color you look like. It didn't matter if you're tall, if you're short, if you're strong, if you're not. The bottom line was, if you can make plays and help the team get the most wins, that's the reason why you're going to be either a starter or either maybe make the team. And then when I play professionally, of course, that's the bottom line. It's all about wins. It wasn't about, hey, what do you think about this? What do you think about that? It's really about this, like, team, you know, are you best fit for the team? And so my question really is, what are your thoughts? Because, you know, in the sports world, it looks like the best players are making the teams, but they're not looking at color of skin and all these other things. Whereas in business, it seems like maybe they go a different route. Now, both of them are businesses, but anyway, I don't know if I asked that right, or if you guys have anything
I think it's a
about that.
phenomenal question.
I can respond, or Ginnette, you also came off mute. So I
You go first and then I'll add.
yeah, Gary, it's a great question, but I think that we can talk about the business of sports, which is overwhelmingly male dominated and mostly white men. And so if we believe that truly the most qualified people and the only people qualified or the best people are all white men, I think we're fooling ourselves, right? Like, it's not true that the best people in business all look a certain way or mostly look a certain way. So if that's not true, what else is going on? And so we need to really, going back to those norms, values, and practices, evaluate them to see how they are not actually allowing us to identify talent that is outside of our preconceived notions of what talent looks like. So going back to referral programs that Ginnette mentioned, most people refer people that look like them. Referrals are great, but if you're only referring people that are in your small network of people you hang out with or people who've done this kind of work before, you're very likely to miss out on people who are also very well qualified and have something to add to your business, because you're just not looking for them. You haven't set up a condition where they are seeing the posting that you have or are able to apply. In sports, a lot of times we think about how we value industry experience, and we kind of overvalue it in some ways. And so if you're only ever hiring people who have this experience, and the only people who have this experience look a certain way, you will only ever hire people who look a certain way. And it assumes that you are, you know, that other people can't do the job or not as good. So I think that if you assume that everyone has come to the table equally and that we don't have any bias in how we look at things, then sure, just picking the best person is the best way to do it. But that's not the reality of things. There is bias. If we only hire from Stanford, people are going to look a certain way. And that's what a lot of businesses have done and how they've approached hiring. And so I think that's sort of the difficulty with that premise. Ginnette, I don't know.
Yeah, I would add to that, you know, I think this is actually where where equity really starts to come in, and you got to start to look at people's starting points. I think your question is an excellent one, and I think it comes up. We see different facets of this. When I try to explain, you know, this concept to my 8-year-old, he loves soccer, and so, you know, I sort of said, you know, how would it be if, you know, you played another team, but you and your teammates had to play soccer with, you know, your arms tied behind your back, right? Like how successful do you think that you would actually be? And in sort of a commercial example, that my boss, when we used to hire people, when we first came out to the States, you know, he really wanted this academic pedigree, GPA to be, you know, at a certain level. And, you know, as we interviewed people and you start to see the difference of, okay, well, their parents paid for college for them, they didn't have to work. And now I've just interviewed somebody who held down 3 jobs while studying for their degree, and no, their GPA wasn't you know, a 3.9 or whatever, but look at what they actually accomplished in order to get their degree. And when I would see people going out the door and being kind of rejected at the gates without actually looking and thinking, well, when this person actually has had all of this privilege, that's great, and we don't begrudge it, but you know, you have to calibrate that is not people starting on a level playing field. And so when I think about, you know, your original question, it's sort of just assuming that everybody has got the same advantages and the same kind of opportunity. And that's why I think equity is a choice, right? Because you get to decide, and hopefully we decide the right way, you know, how we're gonna solve for the fact that we don't all have the same starting point.
Question and great answers. We're going to go to Jervis in Colorado.
Ginnette and Erin, thank you so much for your answers and your information today. I actually, Gary set me up perfectly, so thank you, Gary, because my question has to do specifically with the discomfort that I think predominantly white men feel around this issue. And Ginnette and Erin, you guys both did a good job of illustrating this. But, you know, because white men have built the power structures and organizational structures, whether it was ignorant or malicious, they built it for their own comfort and not for the comfort of others. And that does make this an uncomfortable conversation. So my question is, how can we help make these uncomfortable conversations something that people want to lean into instead of feeling threatened by? Because discomfort, we all know, everybody that's here on TCC knows discomfort is not a bad thing. We know that progress is on the other side of discomfort, but how do we get to a point where we're starting to embrace that as opposed to feeling like it's a constant threat?
Oh, I have opinions on this. So I think so often, you know, you're right? So often we're expecting people to jump into these conversations that are uncomfortable, and we haven't built any foundation of trust there. People don't believe that they will be, that people assume positive intent. And so there's all this fear wrapped up in conversations. And then on the other side, you have people who feel like, well, I come to work uncomfortable every day. So what, that you feel uncomfortable? And so it's very highly charged. Organizations have to build a foundation of trust. If you can't have uncomfortable conversations about work, then you are not going to have uncomfortable conversations about DEI. Like, it's just not going to happen. So how do you build that trust? I mean, it's not easy. It's not overnight. It's consistently having conversations where people understand that there was no negative consequence to me actually saying what I wanted to say, setting up spaces where people can give honest feedback and people just listen and hear it and respond with empathy when appropriate. And so this work and this foundation has to be built before you can honestly expect people to have these honest and difficult conversations. And, you know, I don't know, it's not an overnight thing. It's a long process, but maybe Ginnette has ideas on how to get there.
No, I think it's a really amazing point, because it is actually the thing that's on a lot of people's minds, but again, they don't actually even feel that comfortable to kind of express it. I cannot tell you how many of my own white male friends, particularly in leadership roles, have kind of at some point or other said, I'm actually a little bit uncomfortable about, I don't want to say the wrong thing. And I think that's kind of where it sort of starts, right? Is you know, that I think if you're coming if we're all coming at these conversations with, you know, those right positive intentions, then there is no real wrong thing to say, right? Because the intent is there. But I really think the foundation for a lot of this is just honest, transparent conversations where we're getting to know, you know, people, individuals on that real kind of human level, and kind of understanding sort of differences and different perspectives. And I don't think this just also has to happen within the workplace. So again, you know, I was talking to a friend of mine, and I said, you know, all your you know, your whole social time is spent at the country club with you know, people who look and think like you, right? How else can you just diversify your you know, just your circle of influence in general, and just kind of get curious? You know, there's so many external mentoring opportunities available for people from disadvantaged backgrounds, where the mentor can end up learning so much more than the mentee. Like there's opportunities, I think, for us to just like really broaden our kind of horizons, and I think those are all good kind of starting points. But I think for organizations too, is just kind of you know, not being you are where you are, right? Like some companies are not far enough you know, sort of forward in, you know, with these initiatives, and it's almost become a point of defense for them, right? So they don't want to say we're stuck, you know, or we haven't made as much progress. I think just open, honest, transparent is kind of the way to go. Yeah, there's nothing, I think, to be kind of embarrassed about in terms of these conversations. Like, this is what's going to make our society and our organizations better.
Love it. So we're gonna do a speed round here. We're gonna go to Jason, and then we're going to go to Eric, and if we have time, we'll go to Chad.
Hey guys, Erin, Ginnette, awesome stuff. I love it. Our company puts a lot of resources into this. But from my end, my question kind of going to Ginnette, you mentioned your 8-year-old and just kind of thinking like the upstream play, right? So we're talking about businesses, and obviously I think everybody's background, right, as you guys are interviewing folks, Erin and Ginnette, you know, you're people with diverse backgrounds or in different situations, right, are then kind of, you know, as we say, maybe hardwired a little bit different. So how do you guys think we can kind of get better upstream in helping, you know, schools, and just how kids and you know, early young adults kind of think about this early in life versus, hey, let's not saying we're waiting to the corporate world, but you know what I mean, where we can get a little better ahead of it. And even us as parents, just how do we instill that? You know, I know we can model it, of course, but anything else that you could add would be great.
I mean, I just have age appropriate conversations with my son about this topic. You know, it was, you know, Scott mentioned, obviously the anniversary of George Floyd. I mean, I remember a year ago thinking, how do I explain this, you know, but not kind of shying away from it. So I think in the same way that we're looking for kind of honesty amongst ourselves, that we need to find ways of doing that with our children. I'm always so proud of my son for the way he describes and talks about, you know, how important equality is. And I think there's some really cool books as well that are designed specifically for little kids to be able to kind of understand and kind of digest this information in a really positive way.
Yeah, agree. I have a 7-year-old, and I think just making this not a taboo conversation. This is a conversation that we have. And I think it's important for kids to be comfortable with it so they don't end up as adults like us who think it's such a taboo topic that we're afraid to talk about.
Thank you, guys.
Eric, over to you in beautiful Maryland.
Thanks, Scott. Thanks, Erin and Ginnette. My question around today's topic, of course, DEI and really even in general, I'm just curious, Erin, do you or have you ever collaborated with other teams in the NBA? And further, what about collaborating with other major sports, NFL, professional soccer, NHL, MLB? Baseball. Is there like a get together, or do professionals ever talk and try to help each other out with this topic and many others? I'm just curious how that works.
We talk all the time. So the NBA has several diversity and equity and inclusion councils that teams have representatives sit on. So I sit on that along with someone else from our team and other people. We also do that for talent acquisition as well. And then we're always talking, like I call people up all of the time. This year for voting, we partnered with the Atlanta Hawks to do a big voting drive, and we lost and we were happy to lose. And so there's a lot of that happening. We're constantly talking. For other sports, it's not as much. We do have on the HR side a monthly meeting where we meet with teams across all organizations. I saw somebody put PGA. I've never met anyone from the PGA there. I don't know if they're invited and haven't made it or if they're not invited, but certainly across MLS, NHL, MLB, NFL, and NBA.
That's cool.
We're constantly meeting and talking, and diversity, equity, and inclusion is oftentimes a topic of discussion.
Awesome. Thank you.
I think we're going to Chad. He's our closer.
Ooh, wow. Bringing it home. A lot of pressure here. Erin and Ginnette, yeah, this is powerful. Got a couple notes, a lot of notes here, but first thing I'm going to do is reach out to my own internal team and see what programs that we have in place around this conversation, because I think this could be a huge missing mark for many companies. But with that said, I'm always curious with two of your folks that are so movement forward. Well, what is your legacy, or what do you want to leave behind, or how do you want to be remembered?
Wow. For me, I left a safe job and a successful job to basically start a company that was built on the premise of driving equality for everyone in the workplace. So I feel really inspired by that purpose, and I hope to be able to kind of look back on a legacy of being able to really impact and influence the workplace for the better.
Yeah, and for me, I mean, my professional life is great, but I sit on the board for the East Oakland Youth Development Center, which is an organization that I participated in as a youth. It's super important to me, and I just am thinking about how I get to use this platform that I have to inspire and influence young people, especially in Oakland. And so that is what I would like to be known for, is how did I actually make a difference in some of those young people's lives and help them come into the workplace as adults being ready to succeed.
Awesome. Thank you.
Erin and Ginnette, you guys have been absolutely amazing. This truly was a masterclass because I think we all have a lot of learning and education that we need. And this may just be part one. So I cannot thank you guys enough. The hour flew by. There's just so much to talk about in these important areas. And I hope, that we're going to see massive progress because of people like you guys really leading the charge. So thank you guys so much. Thank you everybody for carving out an hour of your day. I know you've got a lot of things on your plate, but this is a really important topic. And again, thank you, Ginnette, and thank you, Erin, for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.